On the first anniversary of my grandson's passing, I stood alone before the cold headstone in the cemetery, blaming myself for not being there the day he left this world. When I turned around, a strange young girl stared intently at my hand and whispered, "I know a boy who has a scar just like that." Instead of breaking down or causing a scene, I immediately went silent, quietly walking away from that empty grave to launch a covert investigation. The deceitful flesh and blood of mine are about to pay a heavy price. This story will stay with you long after it ends. Before we begin, drop a comment for me. Have you ever had to question someone you completely trusted, just yes or no? Your voice matters here. Quick note, some details are fictionalized to strengthen the lesson, but the truth at the heart of this story is what counts. I had been talking to a stone for 52 weeks, telling it things I should have said when my grandson was alive, except he wasn't dead at all. But I didn't know that yet. The granite was cold under my palm that October morning, polished smooth except for the engraved letters spelling out a name I couldn't say aloud without breaking: beloved grandson. I knelt on damp grass in Laurel Hill Cemetery, while autumn leaves drifted past like small silent witnesses. 55 years old, white hair I'd earned through 3 decades building Apex Industrial Holdings, from machine shop to manufacturing empire, and none of it mattered because I was talking to a headstone. The wind moved through the pine trees bordering the plot I'd chosen, because Keenan loved climbing trees. I'd been in Frankfurt when he died. Business trip, critical contract negotiation, the kind of thing chairman can't delegate. My daughter Anouk called at 2 in the morning, German time. Her voice was breaking around words I couldn't make fit together. Accident hospital didn't make it. I'm so sorry, Dad, he's gone. I flew back to Philadelphia on the first available flight. 16 hours of knowing and not knowing, of believing and refusing to believe. The funeral happened in a fog of black suits and my daughter's tears. Anouk cried into my shoulder while I held her hand and thought we're grieving together. At least we have each other, at least she's still here. I was wrong about that too. Your room hasn't changed, I told the stone, because after a year this had become ritual confession to silence, apology to absence. I walk past it every morning. Sometimes I go in and sit on your bed. Your books are still on the shelf in the order you left them. The red boat sits on my desk where I can see it. I keep thinking I'll put it in your room, but then you wouldn't have it when you... I stopped. When you what? When you come back. When stone turns to flesh and a year of grief becomes a terrible dream. The scar on Keenan's right hand had been his favorite story to tell. Long, thin line across the back from when he was 4, and my Business Leader of the Year crystal trophy started sliding off the entry hall table. He'd lunged to catch it, save the trophy sliced his hand on the sharp base. I'd rushed him to the emergency room, while he clutched the crystal against his chest, with his good hand bleeding and proud. "I saved it, Grandpa. Your treasure." That's what he called it after, his treasure scar. I touched the engraved dates on the headstone. 5 years of life, summarized in a dash between numbers. That's what a grandfather gets when he builds empires instead of memories, when he chooses Frankfurt over birthday parties, boardrooms over bedtime stories. How does a man measure 52 Saturdays spent talking to granite? "Are you okay, mister?" I looked up. A girl stood 3 feet away, maybe 10 years old, with a jacket 2 sizes too large and pine cones bulging from the pockets. Brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. Sneakers worn at the toes, and the kind of direct gaze children have before the world teaches them to look away from grief. "You've been here a long time," she said not unkindly. "I saw you when Mom and I got here. That was like an hour ago." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. Professional dignity meant nothing when you were crying in a cemetery. "I'm fine, thank you." "You don't look fine." She shifted the pine cones in her pocket. "My mom says it's okay to not be okay. She's a nurse." "Your mother's right." I started to stand, knees protesting. 55 felt older when you knelt on cold ground talking to the dead. "I'm just visiting someone." "Someone you miss a lot." It wasn't a question. I nodded. The girl looked at the headstone, reading the dates with the quick math children do. "He was really young. That's sad." "Yes." "Was he your grandson?" The word caught in my throat. "He was." She studied the engraving, then looked at my hands. I followed her gaze. The scar on the back of my left hand, faint white line from a woodworking accident 20 years gone. Her eyes lingered there with peculiar focus. "The boy at our house has a scar just like that," she said suddenly. "On the back of his right hand, a long one." The air went thin. "Lots of children have scars," I managed. Not like this one? She traced a line across the back of her own hand, matching the path of mine, exactly except mirrored. He said it's his treasure scar. Said he got it when he was little, saving his grandfather's crystal trophy from falling. He was really proud of it. The cemetery tilted. Pine trees, granite stones, the October sky, everything moved, except the girl with pine cones in her pockets, standing there, saying impossible things, in the voice of absolute certainty. What did you say? My voice sounded strange, too loud and too quiet at once. The trophy. He said it was crystal really heavy, and it started to fall, and he caught it but cut his hand. He said his grandfather called it a treasure scar because he saved something important. I couldn't breathe. The crystal trophy sat in my office at the Chestnut Hill Estate, Business Leader of the Year, presented by the Philadelphia Commerce Council. Keenan had saved it at age 4, earned the scar, told the story 100 times, with increasing dramatic flair. Only family knew that story. I asked the girl 3 questions in 10 seconds. What's the boy's name? Where is he and how long has he been there? Wren blinked at the urgency but didn't step back. 10 years old and already practiced at not flinching from desperate men in cemeteries. His name is Keenan, she said. He says his grandfather's name is Morton, and he has an old red boat he keeps under his pillow. Says his grandpa made it for him. The world stopped. I made that boat. Red oak sanded for 3 weeks until the surface felt like silk. I'd carved it in my workshop during late nights when guilt kept me from sleep. A grandfather's peace offering to a grandson he'd neglected for boardroom meetings and international contracts. I'd planned to give it to Keenan for his 5th birthday, but I left for Frankfurt 3 days before the party. Critical negotiation couldn't be delegated. The boat sat on my desk wrapped in brown paper with his name written across the top. I never gave it to him. I flew to Germany instead. And then a nuke called with news that stopped my heart. I never gave him that boat, I said, voice hollow. I left before his birthday. It was still on my desk when I got the call that he'd died. Wren's eyes widened. She looked at the tombstone behind me, then back at my face. But he has it, she said. It's old and worn like he's held it a lot. He showed it to me last week, said it was the most important thing he owned. I turned to the granite headstone. Keenan Timothy Valentine, 2019 to 2024. Beloved grandson. I'd chosen the words myself, paid extra for the carved oak leaves, because Keenan loved climbing trees. I'd stood here 52 times, 52 Saturdays, speaking to polished stone about guilt and grief. Except the grave was empty. My grandson was alive. Where? The word came out barely above a whisper. Where is he? Kensington, with my mom and my other mom. He's been there since last October, almost a year. Mom found him at the hospital where she works. He didn't have anywhere to go, so we took him home. 1 year, 52 Saturdays, 365 days of talking to granite while my grandson breathed the same Philadelphia air less than 10 miles away. I knelt beside the tombstone, pressed my palm against cold granite. For a year, I'd been speaking to an empty box. My daughter had buried nothing, while my grandson lived and breathed and kept a wooden boat under his pillow in a stranger's house. The questions came too fast. How did he survive? Where had he been? Why hadn't a nuke known? Unless she had known. The thought arrived like ice water, but I pushed it aside. Not yet. Not until I saw Keenan with my own eyes. Can you take me to him? I stood brushing dirt from my knees with shaking hands. Right now, Wren studied me with an intensity that didn't belong on a child's face. She looked at my coat wool tailored expensive. She looked at my gold watch. She looked at the granite tombstone with its professional engraving. Then she looked at my eyes, and I had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured and found wanting. Maybe, she said, but you have to promise me something first. Anything. You can't scare him. She said it firmly. He's been scared enough. He has nightmares sometimes. He doesn't talk about what happened before Mom found him, but I know it was bad. So, if you're going to see him, you have to promise you won't make it worse. A 10-year-old child was setting conditions for me to see my own grandson. A year ago, I would have found it absurd. I was Morton Valentine, chairman of Apex Industrial Holdings, accustomed to controlling rooms and negotiations and outcomes. But this child had protected Keenan when I couldn't. She'd given him a home when I was talking to an empty grave. She'd earned the right to judge me. I promise, I said. I won't scare him. I just need to see him. I need to know he's real. Wren shifted the pine cones in her pocket. My mom says rich people forget how to be kind sometimes. that they get so used to getting what they want, they forget other people have feelings. I need to know you remember. The words should have stung. Instead, they landed like truth. I knelt down, meeting her eyes at her level. The damp grass soaked through my trousers. I've spent a year believing my grandson was dead, I said quietly. I've spent 52 Saturdays telling a stone all the things I should have said. I chose business trips over birthday parties. I built an empire and lost the only thing that mattered. If you're asking whether I've learned to be kind again, I don't know. But I'm asking you to give me the chance to try. Ren regarded me for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, but if you make him cry, I'm telling my mom and you have to leave." Deal. A 10-year-old child was about to decide if I deserved to see my own grandson, and she was right to make me prove it. She turned and started walking toward the cemetery gates. I followed, leaving the granite headstone behind, leaving the lie I'd been told, the year of grief I'd carried, the 52 Saturdays of confession to stone. Ren led me through streets I'd driven past 1,000 times, but never really seen. We left the manicured quiet of Laurel Hill and entered Philadelphia's working heart, Kensington, with its narrow row houses and corner stores, clotheslines strung between buildings. I followed a child with pine cones in her pocket toward the grandson I'd buried, who wasn't dead at all. The house was smaller than the guest cottage on my estate, and my grandson was somewhere inside. Ren led me to a blue row house with peeling paint and a porch that sloped to the left. Before she could knock, the door opened. Bettina Rawlings, 35 and wearing the tired face of someone who worked night shifts to survive, stood assessing me with the same directness her daughter had shown. Brown hair, pulled back scrubs, visible under an oversized cardigan, hands that looked like they'd spent years doing work that mattered more than the salary suggested. "I was wondering when you'd arrive, Mr. Valentine," she said. "Ren texted from the cemetery, said she told you about the boy." "Is he here?" The words came out raw. "Is Keenan here?" "He's here, has been for 8 months, since February." The living room was small and clean, furnished with pieces that looked salvaged rather than purchased. A couch with patched armrests, a coffee table with water rings. The smell of coffee and something baking normal, smells my estate hadn't held since my wife died. Bettina gestured for me to sit. I couldn't. I stood like a man who'd forgotten how bodies worked. "How?" I asked. "I work nights at Temple University Hospital, emergency intake. I was leaving my shift February morning, freezing cold. I cut through the alley behind the grocery store on Allegheny." She sat on the couch, motioned again for me to sit. This time, I did. There was a boy behind the dumpster, 5 years old, burning up with fever, wearing a white uniform with blue stripes, the kind institutions use. No coat, no shoes that fit. Shaking so hard I could hear his teeth chattering. My hands tightened on my knees. I asked his name. He said Keenan. I asked where his parents were. He said his dad was dead and his mom was gone. I asked where he'd come from. He looked at my hospital badge and started crying. Said, "Don't take me back there," over and over. A white uniform with blue stripes. Institutional clothing. Not a hospital. Not the accident Anouk had described through tears. "What did you do?" "I brought him home." She said it simply, like it was the only choice. I should have called someone, child services police, but he was so scared. Something in my gut said if I called the official people, they'd send him back to wherever he'd escaped from. This woman with tired eyes and calloused hands had done what I, with my mansion and my company and my wealth, had failed to do. She had protected my grandson. So I took him home, gave him medicine for the fever, warm clothes, a bed. He slept 16 hours. When he woke up, he asked if I was going to send him back to the place with white walls. I said no. He's been here ever since. "Why didn't you?" I stopped. She'd already answered. She'd chosen to protect him. "I tried to find his family," she said. "Asked him questions when he was ready. He said his grandfather's name was Morton, said his dad died when he was 4, said his grandfather had white hair and lived in a big house on a hill with chestnut trees." She looked at me steadily, and that's specific. But when I searched for missing children named Keenan in Philadelphia, I found nothing. No Amber Alerts, no police reports. Like he didn't exist. Then 3 weeks ago, Ren found an old obituary at the library. Keenan Timothy Valentine survived by grandfather Morton Valentine, chairman of Apex Industrial Holdings. She let that sit. But the obituary said he died a year ago, so either I had a boy lying about everything or someone declared a living child dead. I was waiting to see which was true. "He's alive," I said. He's been alive this whole time, and I was talking to an empty grave. Bettina studied me, then stood. He's in the back room, drawing. That's what he does when he's processing things. I told him someone was coming, didn't say who, didn't want to promise something I couldn't deliver. She led me down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back. The door was open. Inside, at a desk that looked handmade from scrap wood, sat a boy with dark blonde hair and serious eyes. Keenan Valentine, 6 years old, declared dead while still breathing. He looked up when we entered. His eyes met mine, brown like his father's, serious in a way 6-year-olds shouldn't be. Keenan, Bettina said gently, "Someone's here to see you." He didn't speak. He looked at me for a long moment, then slowly reached under his pillow and pulled out a small wooden boat. Red oak paint chipped from a year of handling the surface worn smooth where small hands had gripped it. The boat I'd carved in my workshop. The boat I'd sanded for 3 weeks. The boat I'd meant to give him before I chose Frankfurt over family. He didn't run to me. He didn't cry. He just held up that chipped red boat like it was the only proof either of us needed. "I made that," I said, voice thick. "Red oak. Sanded it for 3 weeks. You kept it all this time." Kanan nodded slowly. Then he stood, walked the few steps between us, and stopped right in front of me. He looked up with 6-year-old eyes that had seen too much, still holding the boat. Then he said 3 words I'd been waiting a year to hear. "Hi, Grandpa Morton." We sat at their kitchen table eating grilled cheese sandwiches when Keenan looked at me and asked the question I'd been afraid of since the cemetery. "Grandpa, why did you take so long?" The kitchen went quiet. Wren stopped mid-bite. Bettina's hand paused over her coffee mug. Outside the window, I could hear children playing street hockey, the normal sounds of a Saturday afternoon in Kensington. I could have lied, could have said something gentle and vague about complications or difficulties. But this child had already been lied to enough for 1 lifetime. "I was lied to, Keenan," I said. "Someone told me you were gone, that you had died. I spent a year believing that lie. I'm sorry it took me this long to find the truth." He absorbed this with the serious expression that seemed permanently etched on his face now. 6 years old, and already calculating whether adults could be trusted. "They said you didn't want me anymore," he said quietly. "At the place with white walls. They said you gave me away because Dad died, and I was too much trouble." The sandwich turned to ash in my mouth. "That's not true," I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. "I never gave you away. I never stopped wanting you. Someone made you disappear and told me you were dead. Do you understand? I thought you were dead, Keenan." He looked at me for a long moment, brown eyes searching my face for something truth maybe, or the kind of certainty adults usually hide from children. Then he said, "Okay, you're here now." 3 words, complete forgiveness delivered in the time it took to reach for another sandwich half. Wren let out a breath she'd been holding. Bettina smiled into her coffee mug, the kind of small smile that said she'd seen this before, the way children forgave faster than adults ever could. A 6-year-old had just forgiven me in the time it took to finish a sandwich. Adults carry grudges for decades. Children just want their people back. After lunch, Keenan and Wren went outside to play in the small yard behind the house. I watched through the kitchen window as they kicked a soccer ball between them, Keenan laughing at something Wren said. The sound of his laugh, bright and real and alive, made my chest hurt. Bettina cleared the plates, waved away my offer to help, and refilled our coffee mugs. We sat at the worn table, and I prepared myself to hear the story I needed but didn't want. Her voice stayed steady, but her knuckles went white on the mug. He was wearing that white uniform with blue stripes, institutional clothing, the kind they use at residential facilities. No coat. Shoes 2 sizes too big, no socks. Fever so high I could feel the heat radiating off him before I even touched him. He was conscious, but barely. Shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. I forced myself to keep breathing. I knelt down, said I was a nurse, asked his name. He said Keenan. I asked where his family was. He said his dad was dead. And his grandfather, he said, my grandfather Morton, specifically lived far away. I asked where he'd come from. He looked at my hospital badge and tried to run. Bettina's hands shook slightly. He couldn't run far. Fever had him weak, but he kept saying it over and over. "Don't take me back there, don't take me back there, please don't take me back there." I've worked emergency intake for 12 years, Mr. Valentine. I know what trauma sounds like. I know what institutional abuse looks like. And I knew if I took him to the hospital, they'd send him back to wherever he'd escaped from. "So you took him home," I said quietly. So I took him home. Gave him children's Tylenol warm bath, clean clothes my couch. He slept almost 20 hours straight. When he woke up, he asked if this was a hospital. I said, no, it's my house. He asked if I was going to make him go back to the place with white walls. I said no. He started crying. Not loud crying, quiet like he'd learned not to make noise. She looked at me directly. I should have called someone. Child Protective Services, police, someone official. But my gut said the official people were part of the problem, so I kept him. Told my neighbors he was my sister's kid staying with us for a while. Registered him for homeschooling. Those homeschooling, I repeated. She paused. Flagged him as what I asked, though I already knew. As deceased. I found the obituary 3 weeks ago. Keenan Timothy Valentine died October 2024, which meant someone had legally declared a living child dead and hoped nobody would look close enough to notice. Which meant someone very smart had planned this for months and they thought they'd won. I drove back to Chestnut Hill in silence, and when I walked into my office that evening, the house felt like a mausoleum built for the living. The estate sat exactly as I had left it that morning, before the cemetery, before Wren, before everything I thought I knew, shattered like granite under a hammer. The cleaning service had been through. Everything gleamed with the kind of perfection that came from having staff you paid well and never saw. I stood in the doorway of my office and looked at the crystal trophy on the shelf beside my desk. Business Leader of the Year, Philadelphia Commerce Council. Presented 3 years ago at a gala I'd attended with my late wife. The trophy stood 8 inches tall, heavy-cut crystal with sharp edges at the base, my name engraved on a brass plate. The same trophy Keenan had saved when he was 4 years old. The same trophy that had given him the scar on the back of his right hand. The same trophy Wren had mentioned in the cemetery when she described a boy who called it his treasure scar. It had been sitting on this shelf for a year. Every day I'd walked into this office and seen it, never understanding it was evidence. Proof that my grandson had lived, had bled, had saved something that mattered to me, because children measure love in the things they protect for you. I sat at my desk and pulled out my phone. There was only one person I could call with this, only one person who would understand what I needed and why. Roland Irvine answered on the second ring. Morton, he said, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. It's Saturday evening. You never call on weekends. Roland Irvine, 60 years old, with the lined face of someone who had spent 30 years tracking financial criminals for the FBI, had been my investigator of choice for corporate due diligence for the last decade. If a company I wanted to acquire had hidden liabilities, Roland found them. If executive candidate had a criminal past, Roland uncovered it. He was thorough, discreet, and completely incorruptible. I'd trusted him with millions of dollars in deals. Now I was about to trust him with something infinitely more valuable. Roland, I need your help, I said. My grandson is alive. Everything I was told a year ago was a lie. Silence on the other end, then, I'm listening. I told him everything. The cemetery visit, the 10-year-old girl with pine cones in her pockets who mentioned a scar and a trophy. Following her to Kensington. Bettina Rawlings, finding Keenan behind a grocery store in February, wearing a white institutional uniform, burning with fever, begging not to be taken back. The homeschool registration that kept him hidden from a system that had declared him legally dead. Roland didn't interrupt. 30 years of FBI training had taught him when to listen and when to speak. When I finished, the silence stretched for 5 seconds. You're certain it's him? He asked finally. He has the red oak boat I carved, the one I never gave him because I was in Frankfurt when I was told he died. Only Keenan would have that boat. Only Keenan knows about the trophy scar. It's him, Roland. Then someone falsified a death certificate, Roland said, and his voice shifted into the flat professional tone I'd heard him use when presenting evidence of fraud. Someone arranged institutional placement. Someone created a paper trail that made a living child legally dead. That level of conspiracy requires documentation. Money transfers, medical authorization, intake forms, death certification. I know who did it, I said, and the words tasted like ash. My daughter, Anouk. She called me in Frankfurt. She told me he was dead. My voice cracked. She cried at the funeral. I held her hand while we buried an empty coffin. For a year I'd sat in this office making decisions that moved millions of dollars. And 10 miles away my grandson was alive, eating grilled cheese at a kitchen table I'd never seen. Don't call your daughter, Roland said sharply. Don't confront them. Not yet. Roland. Listen to me, Morton. If what you're telling me is true, this was planned, carefully planned. Planned conspiracies leave paper trails, money transfers, medical records, institutional intake forms, death certificates that had to be signed by someone. We need those documents. So I get the documents and then if you confront them now, Roland cut in. Before we have the paperwork, you give them a 24-hour window, maybe less. Dashiell Weaver isn't stupid. He's a corporate attorney who specializes in estate planning. He'll know exactly which documents to destroy, which officials to pressure, which witnesses to silence. You'll have a living grandson, but no proof of the crime, no way to ensure it doesn't happen again, no justice. The word landed like a stone. So what do? I asked. We need the paperwork first, Roland said. Everything. Death certificate, medical records from wherever they held him. Financial records showing who paid for it, intake authorization for the facility. We build a case that can't be dismantled. Then, and only then, do you confront them with evidence they can't destroy because we already have copies. How do you choose between the father's rage that demands immediate confrontation and the strategist's patience that might actually win? How long, I asked. To get the documents, a week if I'm lucky. 2 if the facility is uncooperative. A month if we have to go through courts. But Morton, he paused. Anger is a luxury. You can afford a lot of things, but you can't afford to let rage make you stupid. Not when you're up against people who spent months making your grandson disappear. Roland was right. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford, not yet. My daughter and her husband had spent months planning Keenan's legal death. The only way to beat people that careful was to be more careful. Cold, methodical, absolutely precise. I hung up the phone and looked at the crystal trophy on my shelf, the one Keenan had bled to save when he was 4 years old. I'd kept it all this time without understanding what it meant. Now I needed to understand how they'd done it, every signature, every dollar, every lie before they knew I was hunting. To understand how my own daughter became capable of erasing her son, I had to go back 13 months to the afternoon she saw the will. Roland's investigation would take weeks. I needed those weeks to understand what I'd missed. So I sat at my desk that night and reconstructed it. Every moment I'd been too blind to see. Every warning sign I'd ignored because I was building an empire instead of watching my family. September 2024, 13 months ago. Eugene Donovan's law office in Center City, polished mahogany and leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. I'd brought Anouk with me that afternoon. She was 30, impeccably dressed in the way corporate executives' daughters learn early, and I'd asked her to sign quarterly reports for some subsidiary holdings she'd inherited from her mother. Eugene was finalizing my estate documents at the same time efficiency, I'd called it, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Eugene Donovan, 62, and my attorney for 20 years, had laid out the documents across his conference table. Estate planning, succession documents, the will I'd updated after my wife died. Standard procedure for a man in his 50s with significant assets. Just need your signature on these quarterly reports, Anouk, Eugene had said, sliding papers toward her, while I finalize your father's estate documents. She'd sat down at the conference table. I'd been on a call in Eugene's office, something about a supplier contract I don't even remember now. When I came back into the conference room, Anouk was reading a document that hadn't been in her pile. The will, my will. I remember thinking she looked pale. I remember her hands trembling slightly as she set the paper down. I remember asking if she was okay, and she'd smiled and said something about low blood sugar, skipped lunch, perfectly fine. I didn't think about it again. Not then. What I didn't see, what I only understood later, after Roland pulled phone records and reconstructed timelines, was what that document said. What it meant. 80% of Apex Industrial Holdings to Keenan Timothy Valentine upon reaching age 18. Full voting rights, controlling interest in a company worth $200 million. My grandson would inherit the empire I'd built. Anouk Valentine, Weaver, $5 million trust fund, administered by Eugene Donovan, no voting shares, no control over the company her father had spent 30 years building. 5 million sounds generous until you realize her 5-year-old son would inherit 160 million. 5 million sounds like love until you realize what it actually says, I trust a child more than I trust you. I had been sitting 3 feet from my daughter when her world broke in half, and I didn't even notice. What I learned later, what Roland's investigation uncovered through phone records, text messages, security footage from their apartment building, was that Anouk called Dashiell from her car 15 minutes after leaving Eugene's office. Dashiell Weaver, 32 years old corporate strategy consultant, the kind of man who could look at a balance sheet and find ways to make problems disappear. He'd married my daughter 3 years earlier, and I'd thought he was stable, smart, good for her. I'd thought he'd loved Keenan like a son. I was wrong about a lot of things. The phone call lasted 47 minutes. Anouk sitting in a parking garage crying, telling her husband that her father had given everything to her dead husband's son, that she'd spent 30 years being the perfect daughter and got $5 million, while a 5-year-old got the empire. Dashiell's response wasn't emotion, it was calculation. "We don't change the will," he'd said, according to the call transcript Roland eventually obtained. "Eugene's loyal, your father's sharp. We can't challenge it legally without triggering suspicion. So, we don't change the will, we change the heir." That's when he started planning. Not murder too obvious, too messy, too many forensics and investigations. Something cleaner, something bureaucratic. Make the boy legally dead on paper. No body needed, just the right signatures and the right timing. The inheritance would default to the secondary heir. Anouk would get everything. He spent September and October building the framework, found Northridge Wellness Center, a psychiatric facility in rural Pennsylvania that specialized in difficult cases, the kind of place that asked very few questions if you paid enough. Researched Pennsylvania's laws on involuntary commitment. Studied how death certificates could be filed for missing persons. 2 months, from September when Anouk saw that, to November when they executed the plan. 2 months of Sunday dinners where Keenan sat between his mother and stepfather, laughing at Dashiell's jokes, asking Anouk to read him bedtime stories. They were planning this while Keenan was still alive, still calling Anouk Mama, still sleeping in the room next to theirs. I remember one of those dinners, late October, a month before Frankfurt. We'd eaten at Anouk's apartment. She'd cooked pot roast, Keenan's favorite. He'd been so happy showing me a drawing he'd made at school, 3 houses all connected with lines. "This is my house, and Miss Wren's house, and your house, Grandpa," he'd said. Anouk had smiled and ruffled his hair. Dashiell had praised the drawing, said, maybe Keenan would be an architect someday. And the entire time they were planning how to make him legally cease to exist. Not kill him, that would be too obvious. Just erase him from the inheritance, from the paperwork, from my life. They needed me out of the country when it happened. November came, and they sent me 3,000 miles away to make sure I couldn't stop what happened next. The Frankfurt crisis looked real. Supplier contract, falling apart, manufacturing line, shut down imminent German partners, threatening to walk away from a deal worth $40 million. I landed at Frankfurt Airport on a Tuesday afternoon, November 12th, believing this was legitimate business. I checked into the hotel, called Anouk to let her know I'd arrived safely. She sounded fine, normal. Asked if I wanted to video chat with Keenan before his bedtime. I said I was too tired from the flight, would call tomorrow. That was the last normal conversation I had with my daughter. 6 hours later, my phone rang. Frankfurt time made it 2 in the morning, Anouk's name on the screen. I answered, expecting something minor, time zone confusion maybe, or Keenan wanting to say goodnight across the ocean. Instead, I heard sobbing. "Dad!" Her voice broke around the word. "Dad, it's Keenan. He's in the hospital. Respiratory distress. It happened so fast. They're saying it's serious." I sat up in the dark hotel room, heart slamming against my ribs. "Oh, what hospital? What happened?" "Children's hospital. He couldn't breathe. His lips were turning blue. The ambulance just left with him." "Dad, I'm so scared." Her fear sounded real. Her tears sounded real, because they were real. "I'm getting on the next flight," I said, already pulling up airline websites on my laptop. "I'll be there in 12 hours. Stay with him. Don't leave him." Okay. I'm going to the hospital now. I'll call you when I know more." She called again 6 hours later. 8 in the morning, Frankfurt time, middle of the night in Philadelphia. I hadn't slept. I'd been sitting in that hotel room, refreshing flight options, watching a blizzard develop over the Atlantic that was grounding everything. When I answered, she was crying so hard she could barely speak. "He's gone, Dad." The words came out broken, jagged. "My baby's gone. They said his lungs they couldn't save him. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I believed her because her tears were real. I didn't understand then that you can cry genuine tears while telling calculated lies. That grief and deception aren't opposites. That my daughter could sob with authentic emotion while executing a plan she'd spent 2 months designing. Her tears were real. That's what made it work. You can't fake the sound of a mother's grief, except she wasn't grieving a death. She was grieving the choice she'd made, the line she'd crossed, the son she'd just erased from her own inheritance. I tried to get home. Every flight across the Atlantic was grounded November blizzard worst. In 15 years, runways shut down from London to New York. I was trapped in Frankfurt, while my grandson was supposedly dying, supposedly dead, supposedly being prepared for emergency burial. Pennsylvania law requires burial within 72 hours for infectious respiratory cases. Daschle told me when I finally got him on the phone. His voice was steady, professional, the concerned stepfather handling logistics. The funeral home needs decisions. Anouk can't make them alone. She's asking if you want viewing or closed casket. Ike closed, I'd said, because the thought of seeing Keenan's small body in a coffin was unbearable. Closed casket. I'll be there as soon as flights resume. What I learned later, what Roland's investigation uncovered from security footage, financial records, witness statements, was happening while I sat in that Frankfurt hotel believing my world had ended. Daschle met Dr. Otis Gallagher in a small forensic center on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Gallagher was 58, with an expired medical license and debts that made him vulnerable to the kind of offer Daschle made. Cash in an unmarked envelope. No questions asked. A signature on a blank death certificate. Gallagher signed. Bypassed the coroner entirely. Listed cause of death as acute respiratory failure. Never saw a body because there was no body to see. The funeral home delivered an empty coffin to Laurel Hill Cemetery 3 days later. Premium mahogany white satin lining, brass handles. 70 pounds of wooden fabric. A 6-year-old boy weighs 45 pounds. Nobody checked. Nobody thought to check. And for those 4 days while I sat in a Frankfurt hotel counting hours, Keenan was learning a new name. But they held a memorial service when I landed. Small, private, just family, and a few close friends. Anouk stood beside me at the grave, holding my hand, wearing black, crying real tears. We stood there together in the November cold, looking at a granite headstone that had been rush-ordered and installed. Keenan Timothy Valentine, the dates that made my chest hurt. Beloved grandson. They buried an empty box with my grandson's name on it, and I stood there in the snow, crying over nothing. Anouk leaned against my shoulder. Her tears soaked through my coat. I put my arm around her and thought, at least we still have each other. At least we can grieve together. At least she's still here. I didn't know that, while we stood at that grave, Keenan was being transported to Northridge Wellness Center in the back of a private car, wearing a white uniform with blue stripes. Being told his name was Leo, now not Keenan. Being told his grandfather had signed papers giving him away because he didn't want him anymore. Anouk cried real tears at the memorial service. Real grief, real pain, real loss. She'd lost her son not to death, but to the choice she'd made. She'd traded him for an inheritance, and part of her knew even then what that meant. What they did to my grandson at Northridge wasn't just imprisonment, it was the systematic erasure of a 6-year-old's identity. I learned the details later, piece by piece. Some from Keenan himself, told in halting sentences a child shouldn't have to speak. Some from Roland's investigation intake forms, staff schedules, security logs that documented every moment of my grandson's captivity. Some I reconstructed from the evidence itself, the way you rebuild a crime scene from bloodstains and broken glass. The private car brought him to Northridge Wellness Center on November 15th. Isolated facility in Bucks County, the kind of place wealthy families used when they needed somewhere to put relatives who were inconvenient. Psychiatric care, the brochures said. Specialized treatment for complex cases. Kenan arrived wearing his school clothes from the day they took him. 5 years old, small for his age, clutching the red wooden boat I'd carved, because it was the only thing that still felt real. Nurse Hartley met him at intake. She was in her 40s with bureaucratic efficiency and no curiosity about why a perfectly healthy child was being admitted to a locked psychiatric ward. She had her paperwork. That was enough. Your name is Leo now, she'd told him, according to the statement she gave Roland months later. Leo Morgan. Can you say that for me? Kenan had shaken his head. My name is Keenan Valentine. My dad's name was Timothy, and my grandfather's name is Morton. Leo, she'd repeated. The paperwork says Leo. That's your legal name now. The intake forms listed him as autistic and severely depressed. Orphaned no living relatives ward of the state pending permanent placement. Every word was a lie. But the lies served their purpose. They explained why a child might insist his name was something else, might claim to have a grandfather who didn't exist. might protest being held against his will. Symptoms, the staff called it. Poor thing's delusional, doesn't understand reality. They told him I'd signed the custody papers. Nurse Hartley sat him down in a small white room and explained it with the practiced gentleness of someone who'd delivered bad news before. Your grandfather is Morton Valentine, she'd said. He's a very important man with a very big company. He doesn't have time for a child who needs this much care. He signed the papers transferring custody to the state. He said it was better this way. Keenan told me later that he'd said, "You're lying. My grandpa would never do that." I know it's hard to understand, Hartley had replied, but sometimes adults have to make difficult choices. Your grandfather loves you, but he loves his work more. That's just how some people are. They told a 6-year-old child that the person who loved him most in the world had signed papers giving him away. That's not imprisonment, that's psychological murder. 3 months, November through February. 90 days in a locked ward with white walls and thin mattresses and staff who called him by a name that wasn't his. He hid the red boat under his pillow every night. Staff tried to confiscate it. Personal items required documentation. They said, but Keenan held on so fiercely they gave up. Easier to let the delusional orphan keep his wooden toy than fight him for it. Every morning, staff would ask, "What's your name?" Every morning, Keenan would answer, "Keenan Valentine." Every morning, they'd correct him. "Leo. Your name is Leo Morgan. Try to remember that, sweetheart." And every morning, he'd hold the red boat tighter and say, "My grandfather made this. He carved it with his own hands. He's going to come get me when he's done working." The staff laughed. Not cruelly exactly. Just the way adults laugh at children who believe in impossible things. "Nobody's coming, Leo," one aide told him. "Your grandfather doesn't even know where you are. He thinks you're dead. That's what the papers say." "He'll find me," Keenan had insisted. "He always finds me when we play hide and seek. He'll find me now." But weeks passed. November became December, became January. Christmas came and went. Keenan turned 6 years old in a locked room with strangers who called him by the wrong name. He kept the faith anyway. Every night he'd take out the red boat and run his fingers over the smooth wood, trace the grain the way I'd shown him once back when we still had Saturday afternoons in the workshop. He'd whisper to it like it could carry messages across the miles. "Grandpa's coming," he'd say. "He's just busy right now, but he's coming, he promised." Except I'd never promised. I was standing at Laurel Hill Cemetery talking to a gravestone, believing my grandson was gone. 3 months, 90 days of Keenan waking up every morning and telling himself his grandfather would come. 90 nights of falling asleep, clutching a wooden boat, and believing in a rescue that wasn't coming because the person who would have rescued him thought he was dead. Staff documented his delusions in their reports. Subject continues to insist on false identity. Claims grandfather Morton will retrieve him. Responds poorly to reality orientation. Recommend continued observation. He never stopped, not once. "And how did you keep believing?" I asked him once months later when he was safe and the nightmares were starting to fade. "The boat," he'd said simply. "You made it for me. That meant you love me. People who love you don't forget you. So I knew you'd come." He kept more faith in me than I kept in anything, and I was grieving over an empty box while he was fighting to stay alive. February came, and a heating system failed on the coldest night of the year, random chance that would end my daughter's conspiracy. I reconstructed that night from multiple sources. Keenan's halting account delivered weeks later when he felt safe enough to talk. Northridge maintenance logs that Roland subpoenaed. Weather reports showing temperatures dropping to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Security camera footage from neighboring businesses that captured a small figure running through the snow. February 19th, 3 months to the day since they had brought him to Northridge. The heating system malfunctioned around 9 p.m. Old boiler, deferred maintenance mechanical failure that had nothing to do with conspiracy or justice. Just metal fatiguing at the wrong time. Or the right time, depending on how you see it. The temperature inside the locked ward dropped fast. Staff scrambled to move residents to the east wing while maintenance worked on repairs. Emergency protocol required opening the back security fence to bring in industrial heaters from the storage shed. Someone propped the gate open with a cinder block, intending to close it after the equipment was through. Keenan saw the darkness beyond that open gate. He told me later he didn't think about where to go, didn't have a plan or a destination. He just saw the fence was open and the lights were off and the adults were distracted and he ran. 6 years old, thin white uniform with blue stripes, the kind that marks you as institutional property. shoes that didn't fit right, and clutched against his chest the red oak boat I'd carved with my own hands. I held it really tight, he told me months later, because if I dropped it in the snow, I'd never find it again in the dark, and then I wouldn't have anything of yours left. He ran into the February night wearing cotton meant for climate-controlled rooms, into snow and freezing wind with no coat and no plan and nothing but absolute certainty that anywhere was better than there. Security footage from a gas station 2 blocks away caught him at 9:47 p.m. running past the pumps. Small figure, white uniform, visible against dark buildings. He was already shaking from cold. He kept running, not toward anything, just away. Away from white walls and people who called him by the wrong name. Away from staff who laughed when he said his grandfather was coming. Away from locked doors and lies told in gentle voices. Was it chance or something else that broke that heating system on that exact night? I don't believe in fate, but I believe in that. Somewhere around 11 p.m., hypothermia started setting in. Keenan's account of the next hour was fragmented. He remembered being very cold, remembered not being able to stop shaking, remembered sitting down behind a building because his legs wouldn't work anymore. Behind a grocery store in Philadelphia's industrial district, he curled up against a trash can trying to get warm. Fever from exposure spiked fast in a body already compromised by stress and institutional food and 3 months of psychological torture. He held the red boat and tried to remember what I looked like. Tried to believe I was still coming, even though every adult for 3 months had told him I wasn't. Bettina Rawlings found him at 11:32 p.m. behind the grocery store on Allegheny. The same alley, the same trash cans, the same white uniform she'd already described to me that first afternoon in her kitchen. I'd heard the story once. Living it in my mind a second time didn't make it easier. She offered her hand. He took it. That was enough. When Bettina got close, Keenan's eyes opened. Fever bright, unfocused, terrified. He tried to run. Could barely stand but tried anyway, scrambling backward against the trash can, holding the boat like a shield. "Don't take me back there," he said, voice raw from coughing. "Please don't take me back there. My grandfather is coming for me. Don't take me back." Bettina told me later she had 2 choices in that moment. Call someone, official police, social services, hospital intake, or take him home. Standard procedure said, call. Every regulation, every protocol, every rule said, you don't take strange children home from alleys. But she looked at a 6-year-old boy begging not to go back somewhere, and she made the choice in 3 seconds. She knelt down in the snow and offered her hand. "I'm not taking you back anywhere," she said. "I'm taking you home, my home. You're safe now." Keenan stared at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it. That simple act, a 35-year-old nurse who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, offering her hand to a boy who'd been told no one was coming, was the thread that would unravel everything. My daughter chose to erase him. A stranger chose to save him. Both choices made in seconds. Only one was human. Bettina carried him to her car. He weighed almost nothing, she said. Light as air, burning with fever, still clutching that red boat against his chest. She wrapped him in her work jacket and drove him to the Blue House in Kensington, where her daughter was sleeping, where a spare room could become a sanctuary where a boy named Keenan could become part of a family again. She didn't call anyone, didn't ask permission from any system, just saw a sick child who was afraid, and made the choice my own daughter hadn't made in 3 months. She chose him over the rules. 8 months passed between that February night and the October morning, when Wren spoke to me at the cemetery, 243 days of parallel lives 10 miles apart. I know those 8 months in detail now. Bettina told me most of it that first afternoon in her kitchen. Keenan filled in pieces over the following weeks in halting sentences between bites of grilled cheese in quiet moments before bedtime. Roland's investigation provided the rest: school registration documents, medical records, the paper trail of a boy being quietly saved while the world thought he was dead. Bettina had already explained the homeschooling registration when I first sat at her kitchen table. What I understood only later was how deliberate the choice was, not just practical, but protective. Every official channel was a potential trap. She'd chosen the quietest path through a bureaucracy that didn't know to look for him. The fever broke after 4 days. Temple University Hospital would have reported him to authorities, run his information through databases that would flag him as deceased. But Bettina treated him at home, children's Tylenol, cool clothes, the kind of nursing that doesn't require paperwork. By the end of the first week, color had returned to his face. By the end of the second week, he was eating solid food again. Ren became his teacher, his friend, his sister, in everything but name. She was 10 to his 6, and she took the responsibility seriously. They studied together at the kitchen table, reading basic math, drawing pictures of houses connected by lines. Bettina worked her nursing shifts while they learned trusting a 10-year-old to keep a 6-year-old safe and occupied. Family dinners every night, grilled cheese and tomato soup, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, the kind of meals that taste like home because of who's sitting across the table, not what's on the plates. Keenan slowly relaxed into it, slowly started to smile without looking afraid, slowly began to believe that this small blue house with peeling paint was a place where people told the truth. But every single night, for 243 nights, he placed the red wooden boat beside his pillow before going to sleep. And every single night he said the same words, "My grandfather is working. He's very busy, but he'll come for me when he's done." Bettina told me she never corrected him, never said, "Honey, we looked for obituaries, we found your grandfather's name, we know." She just let him keep his faith because she understood something. I'm only learning now, sometimes faith is all a child has. 10 miles. The distance between Chestnut Hill and Kensington. The distance between grief and hope. I could have driven it in 15 minutes. I never knew to try. Meanwhile, I visited Laurel Hill Cemetery every Saturday morning, 35 Saturdays. 35 weeks of parking my car in the same spot, walking the same path to the grave with oak leaf borders kneeling on grass that went from winter dead to spring green to summer lush to autumn brown. I talked to that granite stone about the corporation, about quarterly earnings and board meetings and contracts that meant nothing, about the house in Chestnut Hill that echoed with absence, about how I'd failed him by choosing Frankfurt over his birthday business, over family empire, over the only thing that actually mattered. I never knew that 10 miles away, my grandson was sitting at a kitchen table learning fractions from a 10-year-old girl. Never knew he was eating grilled cheese and drawing pictures and slowly learning to laugh again. Never knew he was saying my name every night with absolute certainty that I was coming. We lived 8 months in the same city. I drove past Kensington every week going to the cemetery. The route took me within 3 miles of that blue house with peeling paint. I never stopped, never looked, never knew to wonder what was happening in those narrow streets I'd always considered someone else's, Philadelphia not mine. Keenan was healing while I was grieving. He was building a new family while I was talking to stone. He was keeping faith while I was losing it. We were living parallel lives close enough to touch, but separated by a lie big enough to hide the truth. Bettina later told me about the afternoons when Keenan would stand at the window, watching cars go by, asking if that one was his grandfather coming to get him. She'd tell him not yet, soon, be patient, and he'd nod and go back to his homework and never stop believing. A 6-year-old was stronger than a 55-year-old man who'd built empires. That brings us back to October, to the Saturday morning, when Ren Rawlings approached me at the cemetery with pine cones in her pocket. Everything I've just recounted, the will discovery, Frankfurt Northridge, Bettina's rescue, 8 months of parallel waiting. I didn't know any of it then. I just knew 3 impossible things. My grandson was alive. He'd been alive this whole time. Someone had lied to me about the most important thing in my world. Now sitting in my office that evening after finding Keenan, after calling Roland, after beginning to understand the scope of what my daughter had done, I realized something critical. Anouk and Dashiell didn't know Keenan had escaped. They thought he was still at Northridge, still renamed Leo, still locked behind doors they'd paid for with money from my family's accounts, still safely erased from the inheritance from my life, from any position to challenge their theft. Northridge would have realized eventually that a resident was missing. But isolated psychiatric facilities don't advertise escapes bad for business, worse for liability. They would have handled it internally, searched the grounds, maybe filed a quiet report with local police about a confused patient who wandered off. They wouldn't have called Dashiell to tell him their conspiracy had failed, not until they had to, which meant I had a window, a space between Keenan's escape and my daughter's discovery. Time to build a case, gather evidence, construct. Something Roland could take to authorities that couldn't be dismantled or denied. The flashback was over. Understanding what had happened was important, but what mattered now was what happened next. I had my grandson back. Now I needed justice for what they'd done to him. And I needed it before they discovered their conspiracy had already failed. Sunday morning. 24 hours after Ren spoke to me at the cemetery, I'm sitting in Roland's private consulting office in Center City, watching him work through databases most people don't know exist. 30 years at the FBI Financial Crimes Division left him with access and expertise that didn't expire when he retired. His office is small, efficient, lined with filing cabinets and computer equipment that looks more expensive than my car. He's been at this since 6 a.m., he tells me. Couldn't sleep. Started pulling Daschle Weaver's financial records the moment the sun came up. Shell companies, he says, not looking up from his screen. That's what amateurs always think makes them smart. Create an LLC, register it to a fake address, run the dirty money through clean accounts. Like, we've never seen that before. I lean forward. You found something. Keystone Holdings, LLC. Registered August 2024. Business address listed as a mailbox rental facility in Bensalem. Directors listed as D. Weaver and A. Weaver Valentine. Your daughter and son-in-law. My hands tighten on the armrests. Roland pulls up a spreadsheet. Monthly transfers from Keystone to Northridge Wellness Center. $8,500 every month. Labeled as educational charity donations, probably claim them as tax deductions too. When did the transfers start? Roland looks at me. October 5th, 2024. The room goes cold. October, I say slowly. That's 2 months before they declared Keenan dead. 2 months before the funeral happened. They were already paying Northridge while your grandson was still alive. While he was still living with them, eating breakfast at their table, calling them family. The evidence sits there on the screen. Dates, amounts, account numbers, the kind of detail that doesn't lie. At how much total, I ask? Through February 2025, when Keenan escaped $34,000, 4 months of payments. If they'd kept him there the full year, they were planning it would have been over $100,000. 30 years tracking financial criminals taught Roland one truth: they always leave trails. Daschle was arrogant, but he wasn't original. What else? Roland opens another file. Dr. Otis Gallagher, the forensic pathologist who signed Keenan's death certificate. I pulled his credentials through the medical licensing database. He turns the screen toward me. State of Pennsylvania Medical Board. License status expired. When I ask, March 2023, 18 months before he signed your grandson's death certificate in November 2024. I stare at the screen. An expired license means that the signature is legally worthless, Roland finishes. He had no authority to certify anything. The entire death declaration is invalid from the start. Pennsylvania law requires active medical licensure to sign death certificates. Without it, the document has no legal standing. He pulls up another record, bank transaction history. Keystone Holdings made a cash withdrawal on November 10th, 2024, $15,000. Gallagher signed your grandson's death certificate on November 12th. 2 days later. The timeline sits there irrefutable. Payment, signature, funeral. They left a receipt, I say quietly. They left a dozen receipts, Roland corrects. Shell company registration, monthly transfers, cash withdrawal, medical licensing records. Every single piece points to premeditation. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was planned, funded, and executed over months. He leans back in his chair, looking at the printout spread across his desk. Your daughter and Daschle made one critical mistake, he says. They thought money could buy invisibility. Rich people always think that. But money leaves trails. Wire transfers, cash withdrawals, corporate registrations, they all create records. And records don't forget. I look at the evidence, the shell company, the payments, the expired license, the cash withdrawal that matches the date a corrupt doctor signed a worthless death certificate. Is this enough? I ask. Enough to bring to authorities. Roland considers. It's enough to prove financial conspiracy and document fraud. But we need more to make the case unshakable. We need the Northridge records intake forms, medical evaluations, staff notes. We need proof they imprisoned a healthy child by labeling him sick. How do we get those? Carefully, Roland says. Northridge is a private facility. They won't hand over patient records without a court order. And if we request a court order, Daschle will know we're coming for him. He pulls up another document. Security footage timestamp from Northridge's parking lot, obtained through methods Roland doesn't explain, and I don't ask about. How long do we have? Before he finds out, hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. But the moment he discovers Keenan is missing, he'll start destroying evidence. We need everything documented and copied before that window closes. The strongest evidence comes from someone who'd quit rather than stay silent. Roland finds her 3 days into the investigation. Sarah Brennan, 42, and a former Northridge intake nurse for 5 years, quit in March 2025 over ethical concerns. She'd been the one who processed Keenan's admission paperwork back in November. I meet her and Roland at a coffee shop in the Philadelphia suburbs. Midweek, mid-morning, quiet enough for conversations that need privacy. She brings a manila folder and sets it on the table between us with the care of someone handling evidence. I processed his intake myself, she says without preamble. November 15th, 2024. 6-year-old male brought in by private car, no family present. Standard physical assessment, vitals behavioral observation, preliminary medical evaluation. She opens the folder. Inside is a photocopy of an intake form. Handwritten notes, vital signs, chart fingerprints in the upper right corner. Small fingerprints, child-sized. Healthy 6-year-old, Sarah continues. Frightened, yes, but there was nothing medically wrong with him. Heart rate elevated from stress, temperature normal, neurological responses completely typical. I wrote in my assessment, patient appears frightened and confused, but no psychiatric indicators. Medically normal. She points to a line on the form, and then administration changes chart. Autism spectrum disorder, severe depression, high-risk behavioral disorder. I saw the revised file 2 days later. None of it was true. None of it matched what I'd documented. Why keep the original? Roland asks. Sarah looks at him steadily. Because I knew it was wrong. I've worked psychiatric intake for 15 years. I know what actual autism looks like, what genuine depression presents as. That child was traumatized and scared. He wasn't mentally ill. When I saw those monthly payments flagged as educational charity, but tagged to his specific patient code, I knew something was very wrong. What payments, I ask? She pulls out another document. Internal Northridge billing record. Keystone Holdings, LLC. $8,500 monthly, allocated to patient LEO 2411. That was the ID they assigned him. The payment started October before he even arrived. Someone was paying in advance to ensure a bed stayed available and questions stayed unasked. Internal witnesses are gold in conspiracy cases. They're not outsiders guessing they're insiders who saw the machine work and couldn't live with it. I quit in March, Sarah says. Told administration I was relocating for family reasons. Real reason was I couldn't work somewhere that falsified medical records for money. I kept this copy because I thought someday someone might need proof. Roland takes careful photos of every document. Original intake form, billing records, Sarah's handwritten notes, the kind of evidence that holds up in court because it comes from inside the system, not outside speculation. Would you testify? He asks. Yes, she says simply. That child deserved better. If my testimony helps, I'll do it. I thank her. She nods and leaves the folder with us. Insurance policy, she calls it. Evidence that truth existed before, lies overwrote it. Roland and I sit in that coffee shop for another hour organizing the case. Financial records, medical documents, internal witness testimony. The conspiracy is mapped completely now. We just need one final confirmation. 2 days later, I invite Anouk to lunch. Neutral restaurant in Center City. Expensive, but not ostentatious. The kind of place where business lunches happen and nobody listens to adjacent tables. I play the role I've been playing for a year, grieving father, lonely widower man, trying to reconnect with his only living family. Anouk arrives precisely on time. Designer suit, perfect makeup, the polished exterior of someone who controls every detail. She kisses my cheek and sits down gracefully. We order, make small talk about the company, about quarterly projections, about nothing that matters. Then casually I mention his name. I was thinking about Keenan yesterday. I say, keeping my voice soft, reminiscent. Remember when he was 4 and caught my crystal trophy when it fell? Got that scar on his hand trying to save it. His treasure scar, he called it. I watch her. Anouk's hand tightens on her water glass. White knuckles. Her smile doesn't change, but her eyes shift left for a fraction of a second. Dad, maybe we shouldn't. Her voice goes up half an octave. Not grief, anxiety. It's hard to talk about him. How's the new quarterly report looking? She glances at her phone. Once, twice, 10 seconds apart. I know it's difficult, I say gently, still watching. But sometimes I think talking about the good memories helps. Like that time I really can't, she cuts in too fast. Not today, maybe another time. People think lying is about words. It's not. It's about micro expressions that last 1 second. And I'd been reading those for 3 decades. 30 years in boardrooms taught me how to watch faces while discussing hostile takeovers and insider trading. How to see the moment someone's caught in a lie about quarterly earnings. How to read the difference between genuine emotion and performed concern. Anouk isn't mourning. She's managing, controlling the narrative, steering conversation away from dangerous ground, performing the role of grieving mother while fear pulses underneath. I let the subject drop, move to safer topics. By the end of lunch, she's relaxed again, laughing at a story about Eugene Donovan's terrible golf game. I pay for lunch and walk her to her car. She hugs me before leaving, careful, measured, the kind of hug you give when you're performing affection instead of feeling it. I'd spent 30 years in boardrooms watching people lie about quarterly earnings, hostile takeovers, insider trading. My daughter is lying about her son, and she isn't half as good at it as she thinks. But I still need one more confirmation before the trap can close. I watch Keenan trace constellations on the Rawlings ceiling with his finger and wonder when the inevitable question will come. Evening at the Blue House in Kensington. Keenan's small room glows with the warm lamp Bettina keeps on the nightstand. She sits on the edge of his bed reading a picture book about planets, something age-appropriate, gentle, designed to help children sleep. Ren brings warm milk in a mug with cartoon characters. The whole scene looks peaceful. But I've spent 30 years reading rooms, and this one feels like holding breath. Keenan listens to Bettina's reading with perfect attention, nods when she asks if he's following the story, sips his milk at appropriate intervals. The 6-year-old picture of a well-adjusted child settling into routine. Except 6-year-olds don't adjust this smoothly, not after what he's been through. Not after 3 months at Northridge being told his grandfather abandoned him, 8 months, wondering if rescue would come, and now sudden reunion followed by living in a stranger's house while adults navigate custody and investigations. This calm is performance, trauma disguised as resilience. I recognize it because I've seen it in boardrooms, executives maintaining composure while their companies collapse, smiling through depositions, controlling every micro-expression until they're alone. Keenan learned it somewhere, maybe at Northridge, maybe earlier. Bettina finishes the chapter and kisses his forehead. Sleep well, sweetheart. We're right downstairs if you need anything. She leaves, closing the door most of the way, but not completely. Parent instinct leave it open enough to hear if he calls. I stay. Keenan doesn't ask me to, but he doesn't ask me to leave either. I sit in the small chair by his desk, where he draws his pictures of connected houses. Grandpa, his voice is small in the lamplit room. Yes. When can I go back to my old school, with my friends? Safe question. Testing boundaries. We're working on that, I say, lawyer precise. Probably a few weeks. There's paperwork that needs to be sorted out first. He nods, accepts this. Can I get my toys from the old house, the ones in my room? Yes, we'll get all of them. Another nod. He takes a sip of milk. When can I see Dad? The question lands differently. Not testing anymore. This one's real. Your dad died when you were 4, Keenan. You remember that, right? I know, but I want to visit at the cemetery. Can we go? The air in the room changes. Bettina's phone buzzes downstairs. I hear her answer it, muffled conversation about school enrollment, district boundaries, documentation requirements, administrative reality crashing into this fragile moment. The sound of Keenan's life being dismantled and rebuilt through forms and phone calls. He waits until the conversation fades. Then his expression shifts. The careful child mask slips slightly and I see something older underneath. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Anything. He looks at me directly. 6 years old with eyes that have seen too much. Before Keenan asks the question that will change everything between us, if you're still here, comment A, if you think he already knows the truth about his mother, or B, if he's genuinely searching for answers. Please note, what follows contains recreated dialogue for narrative purposes, but the emotional truth is what I hope stays with you. Does Aunt Anouk know I'm here? The room temperature drops. They said she signed the papers for me. He continues, voice steady. At the place with white walls, they said she gave permission because you were too busy and she loved me more. Is that true? 6 years old, carrying knowledge no child should hold. I could deflect, could say we'll talk about it when he's older, could protect my daughter one more time by lying to her victim. But I spent a year talking to an empty grave while this child kept faith. He deserves better than more lies. I know, I say, and I'm dealing with it. No deflection, no protection for Anouk anymore. Keenan nods slowly, not surprised, not asking for details. Just needed confirmation that the adult would tell truth. Okay, he says. That's it, just okay. He takes another sip of milk, and I see his hand tremble slightly as he sets the glass down on the nightstand. First visible crack in his composure. The child is performing strength just as Anouk performed affection at lunch. Both of them, controlling their faces, managing their reactions, showing the world what they think it wants to see instead of what they actually feel. The pattern repeats, daughter to grandson, performance instead of truth. Are you mad at her? Keenan asks quietly. Yes. Are you going to... He stops, searches for words. Are you going to make sure she can't do it again? 6 years old, asking his grandfather for justice in the only language a child knows. Yes, I say, I promise. He nods again. Then something in him releases, not breaking, just exhaling after holding breath too long. I knew you would come, he says. Even when they said you wouldn't. I knew. My throat tights. I'm sorry it took so long. It's okay, you're here now. The same words he said at the kitchen table. Complete forgiveness delivered in 5 syllables. 6 years old, and he's already forgiven more than I could in a lifetime. But forgiveness doesn't mean justice isn't needed. He settles back into his pillow, pulling the blanket up. The red wooden boat sits on his nightstand beside the milk glass, talisman that kept him alive through 3 months of lies. Good night, Grandpa. Good night, Keenan. I stand to leave. At the door I look back. He's already closing his eyes, breathing evening out into sleep rhythm. The final wall inside me crumbles. My daughter orchestrated the abduction of her own nephew, paid to have him imprisoned, told him his grandfather abandoned him, and this 6-year-old boy has already forgiven more than I could ever manage. But he still deserves justice. I close the door gently and walk downstairs. Bettina and Ren are in the kitchen. I thank them quietly and step outside. My phone vibrates in my pocket. Message from Roland. Financial forensics complete. You need to see this tonight. The money trail has a destination. Roland spreads the financial forensics across my desk, like a surgeon laying out instruments before an operation. Late evening at my estate office. The message said I needed to see this tonight, and now I understand why. The money trail doesn't just prove conspiracy, it maps the entire anatomy of my daughter's theft. Offshore accounts, Roland says, pointing to a printout. Cayman Islands registered to a shell corporation that lists Anouk as primary beneficiary. The money from Keystone Holdings didn't stop at Northridge. It moved through 3 intermediary accounts and ended here. I look at the numbers. 6 figures. Money that should have gone to legitimate expenses, charitable donations, family trusts. Instead, it paid for my grandson's imprisonment. How much total? Including the Northridge payments, just over $200,000. She was planning long-term detention, Morton. This wasn't a few months. This was infrastructure for years. Dr. Gallagher's expired license. Raymond Kellerman's statement about being coerced to facilitate the Northridge admission. Money transfers with dates that prove premeditation. We have enough for arrest, Roland says. Warrant sufficient. We can move tomorrow if you want. I look at the crystal trophy on my shelf. Business Leader of the Year. Anouk's name is engraved on the brass plate. No, and I say, not tomorrow. I want one more thing. That Roland waits. Dinner. Here. I'll invite her under the pretext of finally agreeing to hand over company leadership. Tell her I've thought about succession, that I'm ready to discuss transition plans. Why complicate this? Because I want her to see what she lost before she loses her freedom. Roland considers this, then nods slowly. You're staging theater. I'm offering closure, for Keenan, for me, for the year I spent talking to an empty grave while she performed grief. And the trophy. Goes on the dining table, center placement, no explanation, just sits there between us while we talk about her future. She'll ask about it. Eventually, and I'll watch her try to explain why she deserves an award for business leadership, while she was orchestrating her nephew's disappearance. Roland makes a call. 40 minutes later, a tech specialist arrives at my estate, with equipment that looks expensive and specialized. Judicial-grade recording devices, Roland explains. Everything captured will be legally admissible. I watch the specialist wire my dining room. Invisible microphones installed in the chandelier, fixture backup recorders in the baseboard audio quality, calibrated to capture whispers from 12 feet away. The microphone and the chandelier cost more than Raymond Kellerman's annual salary at Northridge. Audio clarity will capture whispers from 12 feet, the tech specialist confirms. She won't whisper, I say. She'll perform confidence until she can't. Roland observes the installation with professional detachment. If she implicates herself on record, it strengthens the case. If she stays silent, we proceed with what we have anyway. Either way, the warrant executes. When, after dinner concludes, timing is deliberate. You get your closure, then Inspector Fitzgerald arrives with officers. The next afternoon, Roland meets Inspector Teresa Fitzgerald at the district attorney's office. He calls me from, there puts me on speaker. Complete file, I hear him say. Forged birth certificate, financial records, medical fraud, witness testimony. Silence while Fitzgerald reads. Then her voice cold and professional. Mothers who orchestrate abduction of their own children deserve no professional courtesy. Agreed, Roland says. The warrant executes after a private dinner tomorrow evening. Timing is deliberate. We want a full confession on record before arrest. You're recording the dinner. Legally, with judicial-grade equipment. Anything she says will be admissible. Another pause, then, what time do I arrive? 8:30. Dinner starts at 7. That gives us 90 minutes. I'll have 2 officers on standby. She won't see us until you're clear. The judge signs the arrest warrant that afternoon. Pre-authorized, waiting only for my signal. Late afternoon, I drive to the Rawlings house in Kensington. Keenan is in his small room drawing. He looks up when I enter. Hi, Grandpa. Hi, Keenan. Can I talk to you for a minute? He sets down his crayons. Serious expression, the one that makes him look older than 6. Tomorrow night, I'm having dinner with some people. It's about what happened to you, about making sure it doesn't happen again. He nods, understanding without needing details. Do I need to be there? No, you've already done your part. This is just adults finishing paperwork. He accepts this, then reaches into his nightstand drawer and pulls out the red wooden boat. The paint is chipped from a year of handling the wood, worn smooth, where his fingers gripped it through 3 months at Northridge and 8 months here. He places it in my hand. Keep this tonight. 6 years old, offering protection to the protector, a talisman against whatever darkness waits in that dining room. A 6-year-old shouldn't have to offer talismans to men preparing for war. I'll bring it back, I say. You don't have to, just keep it safe. I close my fingers around the painted wood. The most important thing I'll carry into that room tomorrow, not evidence files or recording devices or arrest warrants. This, proof that someone kept faith when I'd lost mine. Evening. I return to the estate as the sun sets over Chestnut Hill. The crystal trophy is already positioned on the dining table, Anouk's name engraved, Business Leader of the Year, catching light from the chandelier that now holds invisible microphones. Recording equipment live, warrant signed and waiting at the DA's office. Inspector Fitzgerald on standby, with 2 officers, red boat in my jacket pocket. Everything ready except the guest of honor. My phone lights up, text from Anouk. Dinner tomorrow sounds lovely. I've been waiting for you to finally see reason. 7 p.m. She's walking into the trap, thinking she's already won. Thinking I'm finally ready to hand her the empire she tried to steal by erasing her own son. I type one word, 7. Anouk's eyes find the crystal trophy the moment she crosses the threshold, and I watch her entire body calculate. 7 p.m. exactly. The doorbell rang at 6:58, and I let them wait the full 2 minutes before answering. Control starts at the door. Daschle enters first tailored suit, confident handshake, the smooth professional charm he's cultivated through years of corporate strategy consulting. Then Anouk, wearing designer black that probably costs more than Bettina Rawlings makes in a month. She kisses my cheek, smells like expensive perfume, and her eyes track immediately to the dining table. To the crystal trophy positioned precisely at center. Business Leader of the Year, Philadelphia Commerce Council. Her name engraved on the brass plate beneath cut crystal that catches light from every angle. Daschle's expression stays neutral. Practiced controlled the face of a man who's walked into boardrooms where millions hung on maintaining composure. But Anouk's hand tightens on her handbag, knuckles white for half a second before she releases. I see it. The trophy is the first thing she calculates, and she doesn't know what it means yet. Thank you both for coming, I say warmly, leading them to the dining room. I thought it was time we talked about the future. Of course. Anouk's voice is bright controlled. I'm glad you're finally ready to discuss transition. Her eyes drift to the trophy again. Can't help it. Dashiell surveys the room with casual appreciation. Beautiful home, Morton. I don't think I've been here since the charity gala 2 years ago. 3 years, I correct gently. Before Timothy died. Small beat of silence. Then Dashiell nods. Of course, 3 years. I pour Bordeaux from a bottle that costs more than Dr. Gallagher probably charged for the false death certificate. The wine breathes in, crystal glasses deep red, catching light the same way the trophy does. We sit, the trophy between us like a third guest. I talk about market conditions, quarterly projections for Apex Industrial Holdings, supply chain improvements, the kind of business discussion that sounds legitimate, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a chairman considering succession. The trophy sits untouched, unexplained. Anouk tries to match my casual tone, but she keeps glancing at it. Every third sentence her eyes drift to that engraved nameplate. She lifts her wine glass too often, sets it down too carefully. Dashiell compensates with extra control steering conversation toward concrete succession planning. Anouk has been preparing for increased responsibility, he says smoothly. Her leadership during your absence was impressive. The board spoke highly of how she maintained stability. I'm sure it was. I sip my wine, let my eyes rest on the trophy for a moment. Impressive? Anouk starts to speak, stops, starts again. Dad, is there something you want to say about Sared? The first course should be ready, I interrupt gently. Dinner progresses through courses I barely taste. Salad soup main course prepared by the catering service I hired specifically for tonight. Everything precise, professional, the kind of meal you serve when appearances matter more than appetite. The trophy remains center table. Light refracts through the crystal facets, splitting into spectrum. The trophy catches chandelier light, like a prism, splitting truth into spectrum we all pretend not to see. Anouk's performance of confidence begins cracking around the edges. Her laugh comes out too bright when Dashiell makes a bland joke about corporate tax policy. She refills her wine glass. Once, twice, 3 times. Dashiell notices but says nothing. His own control is impressive jaw. Set expression neutral, only the slightest tightening around his eyes revealing tension. Then Anouk mentions Keenan's name. Casual testing. I heard Keenan is doing well at the Rawlings house. Must be such a relief for everyone that he's adjusting. Dashiell's jaw tightens visibly. First real crack in his composure. He gave me something before tonight, I say quietly. Touch my jacket pocket where the red wooden boat sits. A talisman. Silence stretches for 3 seconds. Dashiell breaks it. Perhaps we should discuss the actual transition timeline. Anouk has thoughts about restructuring certain divisions, implementing new strategic priorities, redirecting, pulling conversation away from dangerous ground. But Anouk can't leave it alone anymore. The trophy has been sitting there for 45 minutes, and she finally breaks. The trophy, she says, voice too controlled. Is this about the award? I thought you'd be proud. Business Leader of the Year, youngest recipient in the council's history. I meet her eyes, say nothing. 5 seconds of silence. The recording device in the chandelier above us captures every breath, every pause, every tell. The recording device in the chandelier captured even the sound of her swallow. Dashiell touches her wrist. Warning, don't push. Too late. Is it some kind of message? Anouk asks. I set down my fork with precision. The sound of silver on porcelain rings clear in the quiet room. It has your name on it, I say. I thought you'd want to see it before I decided what to do with it. Before you decided, she stops. What does that mean? The trap is visible now. They can see it. They just don't know how deep it goes. Dashiell's hand stills on his wine glass. He's calculating running scenarios, trying to determine how much I know and how much I'm guessing. I let the silence build. 10 seconds this time. Let them sit in it. Then I ask the question Roland and I planned. When did you decide? Simple, vague, could mean anything. When did you decide to pursue business leadership? When did you decide to want the company? When did you decide your son's life was worth less than an inheritance? Anouk freezes. Decide what? Her voice goes up half an octave. Same tell I saw at the restaurant when I mentioned Keenan's name. That's what I'm asking. Dashiell leans forward, opening his mouth to intervene or deflect or redirect again. Before he can speak, I add quietly, I've been thinking about Timothy lately. Anouk's eyes dart between me and the trophy, calculating which decision. Which timeline I'm asking about how much I actually know. Dashiell leans forward. Intervention or confession, I can't tell yet. I reach into the folder beside my chair, and placed the first photograph on the table between the wine and the crystal trophy. The white tablecloth makes the colors vivid, Keenan smiling in the Rawlings' small living room. 6 years old, sitting at their kitchen table with a glass of milk and a grilled cheese sandwich. Safe, happy, alive. I say nothing. Anouk stares at the photograph, her nephew removed from her reach, living 10 miles from the empty grave she helped me cry over. Dashiell's fork pauses midair. Dad, what is this? Anouk's voice is careful. I don't answer, just reach into the folder again. The second document slides across the white tablecloth with a whisper of paper on linen. Northridge Wellness Center, intake forms. Official letterhead. Patient name, Keenan Valentine. Age 6 years. Admitted by Raymond Kellerman. Date November 15th, 2024. Signatures in 3 places. Doctor's notes about trauma response, elevated heart rate patient, appears frightened and confused. Still no words from me. Anouk's hand trembles, reaching for her wine glass. Those are private medical records, Dashiell says, voice sharp. How did you... I place the third document. His voice cuts off. Cash flow statement. Keystone Holdings, LLC, to Northridge Wellness Center. $8,500. Monthly payments routing numbers highlighted in yellow. Wire transfer dates corresponding exactly to deposits in Raymond Kellerman's personal account. Amounts, dates, account numbers, the paper trail they thought they'd hidden. Dashiell looks at the door, calculating distance exit strategy, whether he can still talk his way out. Anouk looks at Dashiell. Dash, what is he talking about? What account? I place the fourth document without looking up. Forged birth certificate. Certificate of live birth, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Mother, Anouk Valentine Weaver. Child, Keenan Timothy Valentine. Signatures analyzed by forensic document examiner. At conclusion, forgery. Beside it, Raymond Kellerman's sworn statement notarized 3 days ago, describing exactly how he was paid to facilitate Keenan's admission to Northridge using falsified custody paperwork. My silence is absolute. The recording equipment in the chandelier above captures Anouk's sharp inhale, captures Dashiell's chair scraping back an inch. Each document landed like a card in a game she'd already lost, but couldn't stop playing. That man is lying, Anouk says, voice rising. Whatever he told you, whatever he's claiming, Raymond Kellerman is... We should leave, Dashiell interrupts, standing halfway. Anouk, we should leave now. No. She grabs his arm, pulls him back down. No, we're not leaving. Dad, you have to listen to me. You have to let me explain. I place the fifth document. Fingerprint analysis. Professional forensic report. Anouk Valentine. Weaver's fingerprints lifted from custody transfer documents at Northridge Wellness Center. Matched against her prints on file with the Pennsylvania Medical Board from her hospital volunteer work. Timestamps proving she was physically present at the facility on November 14th, 2024, 1 day before Kanan's admission. On November 20th, 2024. On December 3rd, 2024. Visiting her imprisoned nephew while telling me she was shopping for Christmas presents. The trophy still gleams at table center. The evidence fans across white linen like an accusatory hand of cards. Photo, medical records, financial statements, forged documents, fingerprints. I meet her eyes, say absolutely nothing. The chandelier recording device captured the sound of her breathing changing. I can explain all of this, Anouk says desperately. If you'd let me explain the context, the reasons. I pick up my wine glass, sip, set it down with careful precision. Still silent. This isn't what it looks like. She tries again. Dash was trying to protect the family's interests. The will was unfair, Dad. You gave everything to a 5-year-old. You gave Timothy's son $160 million and gave me your actual daughter $5 million. Do you know how that felt? Dashiell closes his eyes. She's admitting too much. But I don't speak. Don't interrupt. Just let the recording equipment capture every word. We weren't going to hurt him. Anouk continues, words tumbling faster now. The facility was comfortable. He was safe. We just needed time to restructure things, to fix what Timothy's death had broken. It was temporary, Dad, just until we could work out the legal complications. Stop talking, Dashiell says quietly. She doesn't. Can't. The silence from me is unbearable, and she's filling it with confession. You weren't supposed to grieve this long, she says, and there are tears in her voice now. You were supposed to move on. accept it, eventually understand that the company needed strong leadership, that I was ready, that Keenan was too young to... Anouk. Dashiell's voice is sharp. Final warning. She looks at me desperate for response. For anger accusation, something she can argue against. I give her nothing, just silence, just the evidence spread between us and the trophy catching light. Say something, she begs. Accuse me, scream at me, tell me I'm a monster, something. I touch the red boat in my jacket pocket. Keenan's talisman, his protection, his faith that I would come for him even when every adult told him I wouldn't. Then I pick up my wine glass again. Sip. The Bordeaux tastes like ash, but I drink it anyway. Absolute silence. Anouk's composure shatters. She pushes back from the table chair, scraping loud against hardwood. Stands. Flight response finally triggered after an hour of psychological pressure. Dashiell grabs her wrist. Don't. I can't. She's shaking. He won't say anything. He just sits there with those papers and that fucking trophy and... Sit down, Dashiell commands. But she's past taking orders, past maintaining the facade. She's breaking and Dashiell knows it. I wait. The trap needs them to speak first. Needs their unscripted reactions, their panic, their admissions caught on judicial-grade recording equipment that will hold up in court. Because silence is the loudest accusation. The silent strategy begins the moment we sit down. Dashiell's hand finds Anouk's wrist under the table, 3 short presses deliberate. I watch the signal pass between them like electricity through a circuit. Her mouth closes mid-sentence. Her breathing slows. They've practiced this. Morton. Dashiell says, voice calm, measured, I think we should pause this conversation. You're clearly upset, understandably so, but these accusations are documented, I say. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Then perhaps we should continue this discussion with legal counsel present, for everyone's protection. Anouk nods too quickly. Yes, that's reasonable. I lean back in my chair, touch the red boat in my pocket, say nothing. The silence stretches. 30 seconds, a minute, 2. Dashiell maintains perfect composure. He's good at this boardroom training negotiation, tactics, the art of strategic patience. He picks up his wine glass, takes a measured sip, sets it down with precise control. But Anouk was never built for silence. I watch her unravel in real time. Her fingers drum against her thigh, 1, 2, 3, 4, stop, start again. Her breathing accelerates. She glances at Dashiell, at me, at the window, at her hands. Dad, she says finally, say something. I don't. Yet this is ridiculous, she continues, voice rising. You can't just sit there and accuse us of... Dashiell's hand finds her wrist again, tighter this time. She shakes him off. No, she says. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not sitting here while he looks at me like I'm... What breaks people isn't pressure, it's the absence of it. The vacuum where response should be. The mirror that reflects only themselves. I learned this in Frankfurt. In that office where Dashiell explained why I couldn't leave, why the paperwork would take weeks, why I should trust him. I argued, pleaded, demanded. He simply waited. Now I wait. You want to know what happened? Anouk's voice cracks. Fine, fine. Dashiell thought we thought it was a practical solution. You were spiraling, Dad. After Mom died, you weren't thinking clearly. The company needed stability. Keenan needed... Anouk. Dashiell's voice carries a warning. She ignores him. You were going to give everything to a 6-year-old, she says. Everything Mom and you built, everything we built. 40% voting shares to a child who can't even read a balance sheet. And we'd get what scraps $5 million while some trustee controls our family's legacy. The truth when it comes always comes fast. So, yes, she continues, words tumbling. Now, yes, we made a choice. We chose to protect PEX Industrial Holdings. To protect our family's future. Dashiell said, he said if Keenan was gone, if you thought he was gone, you'd focus on the company again. You'd see reason. You'd remember that I'm your daughter, that I've earned. By killing my grandson, I say quietly. It's the first thing I've said in 8 minutes. We didn't kill him. Anouk slams her palm on the table. We saved him from your insanity, from your grief-driven favoritism, from... You forged his birth certificate, I say. Changed his name, hid him with strangers. With family, she insists. Bettina is Mom's cousin. She's good to him. He's happy there, safe. We were going to, eventually when you were stable again, we were going to what my voice could cut glass. Resurrect him, explain the miracle. She falters. Dashiell stands. This conversation is over. Anouk, we're leaving. But Anouk doesn't move. She's staring at me, and something in her face shifts. The anger drains away. What's left looks like the daughter I used to know, before Dashiell, before the inheritance, before Catherine died and everything turned to ash. It was supposed to be temporary, she whispers. Dashiell said he promised it was just until you stabilized, until the board stopped questioning your leadership, because that would mean admitting what you'd done. Because you wouldn't stabilize, her voice breaks. You kept grieving, kept visiting that fake grave, kept talking about him like he... She's crying now, real tears. Dashiell said we had to commit, she continues. That if we wavered, if we second-guessed, we'd lose everything. So we paid Raymond to maintain the story, set up the offshore accounts, made sure Bettina understood the stakes. And it worked, Dad. It worked. The board trusts you again. The company's stronger than ever. And Keenan is fine. He doesn't even remember. He remembers, I say. Silence. He remembers his name, I continue. Remembers his mother. Remembers me. He draws boats because I taught him to draw boats. Anouk's face crumples. Dashiell moves toward her, but she holds up a hand. I'm sorry, she whispers. Dad, I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to. I never meant... Are you finished? I ask. The doorbell rings precise, expected. Dashiell's face drains of color. Anouk freezes mid-breath. I stand, smooth my jacket, touch the red boat in my pocket one final time. Oh, that, I say quietly, will be Inspector Fitzgerald. He's been waiting outside since 8 o'clock with a signed arrest warrant. Anouk's eyes go wide. What? Everything you just said, I continue walking toward the foyer, was recorded on a judicial-grade device installed in this room 6 hours ago. Your confession, Dashiell's conspiracy, Raymond's payments, the offshore accounts, all of it. I pause at the dining room threshold. You were right about one thing, I say. I did stabilize, 3 weeks ago. The moment I saw my grandson alive. The doorbell rings again. I go to answer it. Roland enters first, then Fitzgerald, with 2 uniformed officers behind her, and the crystal trophy catches their badges like a spotlight. Mr. Valentine. Fitzgerald says, voice formal now, professional. I step aside. Inspector. She crosses to the dining room, where Anouk and Dashiell sit frozen in their chairs. The recording device is still running small red light, blinking on the sideboard behind the flowers. Fitzgerald presents, the warrant unfolds it with practiced precision. Anouk Weaver, Dashiell Weaver, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, false imprisonment, and parental kidnapping of a minor. Dashiell stands. The officer's hand finds his shoulder immediately gentle but absolute. I want my attorney, Dashiell says. You'll have that opportunity, Fitzgerald replies. Anouk doesn't stand. She turns to me, tears streaming. Dad, please, tell them I was manipulated. Tell them, Dashiell, tell them. I never meant... I watch her, say nothing. This is the twist she didn't see coming. Not the recording, not the arrest, but the silence. The absence of the father who always protected her, always smoothed over consequences, always chose her comfort over truth. The handcuffs close with a sound like a door locking. Dad, her voice breaks. Please. The officers guide them toward the foyer. Dashiell walks with controlled dignity, already calculating his defense. Anouk keeps looking back at me, searching for the rescue that won't come. Roland touches my elbow. You all right? No, I say, but it's done. The front door closes. The house fills with silence. Fitzgerald lingers, collecting the recording device. We'll need your testimony, she says quietly. Preliminary hearing in 3 weeks. I'll be there, I tell her. She pauses at the door. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. After she leaves, I stand in the dining room, where my daughter confessed to stealing my grandson. The wine glasses are still on the table. Hers is half-empty lipstick marking the rim. I pick them up, wash them, put them away. Some things you can't delegate. The next morning, I present the complete truth to the Apex board without concealment. 12 faces around the mahogany table. 12 people who trusted me to lead Pex Industrial Holdings through Catherine's death, through my grief, through the fiction of Keenan's funeral. My daughter orchestrated my grandson's kidnapping to seize control of this company. I say, no preamble, no softening. You deserve to know. I walk them through it, the forged birth certificate, the offshore payments, the voting shares that made a 6-year-old worth more dead than alive in Anouk's calculation. When I finish, the silence stretches. Then Gerald Morrison, 72 board member since Catherine's father ran the company, clears his throat. Bornd, he says the shares were never worth a child's life. We stand with you. Another voice, the company's reputation survives truth. It doesn't survive complicity. The vote is unanimous. Full support. No questions about my judgment, my leadership, my ability to continue. One member adds, if this company can't stand on truth's side in this, what the hell are we building? Explained when the steward bastard. I thank them. Leave the boardroom before the relief can crack my composure. The reporters wait on the building steps like a jury. No prepared statement, no PR team. Roland offered to handle it. I declined. Some things require a grandfather's voice, not a spokesman's. Mr. Valentine, the first question comes, was the kidnapping motivated by your company's value? It was motivated by greed, I say. The victim was a 6-year-old. What about Peck's Industrial Holdings involvement? There was no corporate involvement. This was my daughter's choice driven by inheritance she felt entitled to. What about your daughter? Will you testify against her? I meet the camera directly. The justice system will address that. I'm focused on Keenan. Another reporter. You're speaking as a grandfather, not a CEO. I'm speaking as a grandfather who failed to protect his grandson for an entire year. My voice doesn't waver. He was declared dead while alive. He spent 12 months believing I'd forgotten him. That failure is mine. Everything else is secondary. The cameras capture a grandfather, not a chairman, exactly as I'd intended. No one asks about stock prices or board confidence or succession planning. They ask about Keenan. I tell them he's safe, that he's resilient, that he deserves privacy to heal. Then I walk to my car and drive to Kensington. Kanan sits on the Rawlings sofa, red boat in his lap. Ren and Bettina give us space, but stay in sight, protective instinct I appreciate. I sit beside him, no cushion between us this time. Your Aunt Anouk was arrested, I say simply. She did things that hurt you, and there are consequences. He processes this with that impossible 6-year-old composure. Is she hurt? He asks. No, I tell him, but she'll face justice for what she did. He nods, runs his thumb along the boat's painted hull. Okay, he says. A 6-year-old asking if his abductor was hurt more grace than I'd ever earned. The truth is hard sometimes, I continue, but I promised I wouldn't lie to you, even when it hurts. I know, Keenan says, then quieter, thank you. 2 words. They crack something in my chest that the arrest the board meeting the press couldn't touch. And Ren watches from the kitchen doorway, when Keenan slides off the sofa to show Bettina the boat she crosses to me. You kept your promise, she says. I remember our first conversation. The way she tested me demanded I prove Keenan mattered more than reputation or comfort or family loyalty. He deserved someone who wouldn't lie to him, I say, even when the truth was unbearable. Bettina joins us, the voice soft. What happens to Keenan now? We keep promises, I tell her, starting with safety. Ren nods. Everything else followed from that, didn't it? The investigation, the arrest, the board, all because you swore to a 10-year-old boy you'd find the truth and tell it honestly. She's right. The entire machinery of justice, Roland's investigation, Fitzgerald's warrant, the judicial recording device, the press statement, all of it stemmed from a single promise made in this living room 3 weeks ago. I swore I wouldn't lie to Keenan. Everything else followed. Before I leave, I try to return the red boat to Keenan's nightstand. The talisman served its purpose. But he retrieves it, presses it back into my palm. That you keep it, he says, for when you talk to my dad. The living, not the dead, need talismans now. I close my fingers around the wooden hull. I promise. Outside, the November air bites cold and clean. Roland waits by the car. The prosecutor called. Preliminary hearing, December 8th. I'll be there, I say. He studies my face. You all right? I look back at the house where my grandson is safe, where the truth has been told, where promises are kept. I will be, I say. The courtroom smells like old wood and institutional disinfectant, and Bettina's hands shake slightly as she takes the witness stand. I keep the red boat in my jacket pocket. Keenan asked me to carry it when I talked to his father, but Timothy isn't the only conversation it witnesses now. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Ellen Hobbs, approaches with measured steps. Ms. Rawlings. She begins, "Can you describe the night you first encountered Keenan Valentine?" Bettina's voice is quiet but steady. October. Late. Ren brought him home, thin, scared, didn't speak for 2 days. What did you observe about his emotional state during the 8 months he lived with you? Stories. Estoy pausing. And Bettina looks directly at the jury. He never stopped believing his grandfather would come. Even when I doubted, even when it seemed impossible, he believed. The defense attorney, a man named Marcus Landry, who's been paid very well to make my daughter sympathetic, stands. You had financial motive to keep the child in your care, didn't you? Foster payments, potential adoption benefits. I had a moral obligation to protect him. Bettina cuts him off. Her tears are real. The jury sees it. Landry sits back down. What credibility means in a courtroom isn't degrees or titles. It's a working-class woman who took in a frightened child and asked nothing in return. Wren follows her mother to the stand. Ellen Hobbs asks the critical question, "What convinced you Mr. Valentine's investigation was legitimate?" Wren doesn't hesitate. Keenan never doubted. A 6-year-old had more faith than any adult in that room. When his grandfather showed up asking questions, I believed him because Keenan always said he would come. Did you have concerns about returning Keenan to his family? I had concerns about the people who faked his death, Wren says flatly. Working people know what abandonment looks like. This wasn't it. Marcus Landry tries to discredit her nurse with no legal training, emotional investment, clouding judgment, insufficient verification before involving authorities. Wren looks at him like he's suggested the sky is green. I watched a child draw boats for 8 months, she says. His grandfather taught him. That's not delusion, that's memory. The most important witnesses in this trial have no expert qualifications, just truth. When Ellen Hobbs calls my name, the courtroom shifts. I take the stand, place my hand on the Bible, swear to tell the truth. I've been doing that for months now. This is just the formal version. Ellen walks me through the timeline, Catherine's death, the will, Keenan's supposed drowning, the funeral I attended for an empty casket. Then she asks the question that matters. Mr. Valentine, what was the hardest part of this past year? I didn't prepare an answer. Roland told me to stick to facts, avoid emotion, let the evidence speak. But the truth comes anyway. Knowing my grandson lived a whole year thinking I'd forgotten him, I say, I can live with lost money. I can live with betrayal. I can't live with that. The courtroom goes silent. The jury watched a CEO break on the stand over a grandson, not a fortune. Marcus Landry approaches for cross-examination. He's gentler than he was. With the Rawlings women knows better than to attack a grieving grandfather in front of a jury. Mr. Valentine, you've stated your daughter was motivated by inheritance. Isn't it possible she was manipulated by her husband? Oh, she signed the forged birth certificate, I say. She visited him at the Rawlings house. She knew. No further questions, he says quietly. It's rare a defense attorney with nothing left to attack. Closing arguments stretch across an afternoon. Ellen Hobbs presents the constellation of evidence, the recorded confession, the offshore financial trail. Bettina and Wren's testimony, my own account of the investigation. The recording proves premeditation, she says. The financial trail proves motive. Keenan Valentine proves the victim was real, vulnerable, and abandoned by the people who should have protected him. Marcus Landry does what he's paid to do. He argues Anouk was manipulated by a sophisticated husband with financial expertise, that she was a grieving daughter who made desperate choices under Dashiell's influence, that the system should recognize degrees of culpability. The jury watches Anouk perform remorse in her seat, then watches the video of her dinner confession where she blamed Dashiell before admitting full participation. The contrast is damning. How do you defend against a mother who used her own nephew as leverage for voting shares? You can't. Both sides rest. The judge, a stern woman named Honor Patricia Keating, who's presided over family crime cases for 20 years, gives the jury instructions. Deliberation begins. 6 hours later, we're called back. The jury foreman is a middle-aged man in a postal worker's uniform, took the day off to serve civic duty. His face reveals nothing as he stands. Judge Keating asks the question, has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of parental kidnapping of a minor, how do you find guilty? The word lands like a stone in still water. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. On the charge of forgery of legal documents, guilty. On the charge of illegal custody transfer, guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. Anouk makes a sound, half sob, half gasp. Daschle stares straight ahead, jaw tight, already calculating appeals. Judge Keating's voice cuts through. The defendants are hereby convicted on all counts. Sentencing will occur in 30 days. Defendants are remanded to custody. Officers approach the defense table. Anouk turns to me as the handcuffs come out. Stad! I don't turn around. I look up at the courtroom ceiling, ornate plaster, decades old, witness to countless verdicts, and exhale. It's the first full breath I've taken in a year. Not celebration, just relief from the weight of carrying a lie. Outside, the December cold bites clean. Inspector Fitzgerald finds me on the courthouse steps. Mr. Valentine. She hands me a sealed envelope. Official letterhead. Family Court of Philadelphia. Keenan's permanent custody hearing is scheduled, she says. January 15th. The judge is requesting your input on placement. I stare at the envelope. They're asking what you want for him, Fitzgerald continues. For the first time in this entire ordeal, through investigation, arrest trial, verdict, I don't have an answer prepared. What do I want for Keenan? The question isn't what's legal or just or procedurally correct. It's what's right. And I don't know. You have 3 weeks, Fitzgerald says gently. I slip the envelope into my pocket next to the red boat. 2 talismans now, one for the past, one for the future. Both asking questions I'm not sure how to answer. Eugene spreads the trust documents across his desk, while Bettina sits rigid in the chair beside Wren, already preparing to refuse. The custody hearing notice is still in my jacket pocket. 3 weeks to decide Keenan's future. But first this. Ms. Rawlings, Eugene begins, Mr. Valentine has asked me to establish an irrevocable educational trust in Wren's name. Bettina's back straightens. We didn't do it for money. I know, I say, that's exactly why. Eugene continues with practiced calm. This isn't payment for services rendered. It's a fully funded educational trust. College graduate school, any accredited program Ms. Wren chooses. Tuition books, housing stipend for living expenses. Bettina starts to stand. Mr. Valentine, we appreciate the thought, but you saved my grandson. I cut her off. Not for reward, not for recognition, because it was right. That kind of integrity doesn't come with conditions, so neither does this. Wren sits quietly, hands folded in her lap, watching the exchange. Eugene slides the documents forward. The trust is irrevocable, Ms. Rawlings. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether Wren uses it. I see the exact moment her pride meets her love. Love wins. She wants to be a pediatric nurse practitioner, Bettina says quietly. Wren's head turns sharply. Mom, 8 years of school. Bettina continues, voice cracking. Undergraduate, then graduate program. The costs are, she stops. Covered, I say. All of it. Undergraduate, graduate, doctoral if she wants. Books, housing, everything. Eugene produces another page. Annual stipend of $30,000 for living expenses. No performance requirements beyond enrollment and satisfactory academic progress. Renewable indefinitely for approved programs. Bettina puts her face in her hands. Wren reaches for her mother's arm. Mom, it's okay. Say thank you, Bettina whispers. Wren turns to me. I don't have words big enough. You believed a 6-year-old when adults doubted, I tell her. That's worth more than any scholarship I could fund. Eugene walks through the remaining details. Annual reviews, trustee provisions, transfer protocols if Wren changes institutions, the legal architecture of gratitude. Wren stays quiet through most of it processing. Then when Eugene finishes, this sounds wonderful, but could I ask for something else too? Anything, I say. She hesitates. Could I have a fountain pen, a good one, for taking notes in classes? The room stops. Eugene's pen pauses mid-signature. Bettina looks up confused. A 17-year-old offered unlimited education, just asked for a writing instrument. What kind of pen were you thinking? I manage. I don't know brands, Wren admits. Just something that writes well, that lasts. Bettina finds her voice. Wren, he just offered you a college education. I know, Wren says. That's amazing. I'm grateful. But I need a pen to take notes with. Some people are incorruptible by accident of character. I'll handle it personally, I tell her. Eugene drafts an addendum, one fountain pen of recipient's choosing, despite the absurdity of memorializing a $10 request in a 6-figure trust document. But it's not absurd. It's the entire point. The girl who believed Keenan's impossible story values learning tools over luxury. She's exactly who Catherine would have wanted to help. Oh, The next morning, I visit a specialty pen shop in Rittenhouse Square. The sales associate, a man in his 60s who's forgotten more about writing instruments than I'll ever know, asks what I'm looking for. The best you have, I say, for a student, someone who takes learning seriously. He shows me Mont Blanc Pelican vintage Waterman, beautiful pieces, status symbols. Then he brings out something different, Architect's pen, he explains. Handcrafted, custom balanced for extended note-taking. The feed is designed for consistent flow over hours of use, cartridge or converter her choice. I hold it. The weight is perfect, deliberate. This one, I say, excellent choice. He pauses. Would you like it engraved? Oh. I think about what Wren did, believed a child, helped a stranger, asked for a pen. If for believing, I tell him, then the initials MV. The pen costs less than the trust's monthly interest, but it matters more to her. Oh, that afternoon I deliver it personally. Bettina answers the door, still processing yesterday's meeting. Mr. Valentine, you didn't need to... Is Wren home? She calls her daughter. Wren appears from the kitchen dish towel in hand, and I present the box. She opens it slowly. The pen sits in fitted velvet deep blue lacquer, catching the light. As for the nurse practitioner who saw truth when lawyers couldn't, I say. Wren lifts it carefully, tests the weight, reads the engraving. I'll use it for every class, she whispers. Every single one. I know you will. Bettina's crying again. I'm getting used to that. Wren sets the pen down with reverence, then does something unexpected. She hugs me. Not performative, not grateful recipient to benefactor, just human. Thank you, she says into my shoulder, for trusting that Keenan was worth believing. Yes, you made that easy, I tell her. When I turn to leave, Keenan is waiting on the porch. He's holding the red boat, the one he told me to keep for talking to his father. Did you talk to Dad yet? He asks. I stop. Not yet. About what comes next. The custody hearing notice weighs heavy in my pocket. January 15th, 3 weeks. The court wants to know what I want for Keenan. Stability with the Rawlings family who saved him. They love him. He's safe here. Or custody, with me his grandfather, 55 years old. Single running a company, carrying more guilt than any one person should. What's right isn't always clear. I need to figure some things out first, I tell him. Keenan nods. 6 years old, processing adult complexity with impossible composure. Okay, he says, but you should probably talk to him soon, before the court date. He hands me the boat. How do you know about the court date? I ask. Wren told me. She said the judge wants to know where I should live. He looks up at me with Catherine's eyes dark, direct, unflinching. I think you should ask Dad, Keenan says simply. He'd know what's right. The living need talismans. The dead need conversation. Maybe the 6-year-old is right. I close my fingers around the wooden hull. I'll talk to him, I promise. Keenan smiles, the first real one I've seen since the cemetery. Driving home, I realize I've been carrying Timothy's death for a year, like a stone. Maybe it's time to carry his memory like a conversation instead. The custody hearing is in 3 weeks. But first I need to visit a grave and ask my son what comes next. The cemetery workers arrive at 8 in the morning with equipment to remove a tombstone for a child who never died. Keenan stands beside me, hand in mine, Wren and Bettina behind us. The December cold bites through my coat, but Keenan doesn't shiver. He watches with that impossible 6-year-old composure as they position the crane. The granite marker is small, simple, his name carved deep, Keenan Timothy Valentine. Born, died, both dates lies. Are you sure you want to watch this? I ask him. He nods. I need to see it go away. The workers are efficient. Straps around the stone. Hydraulics engage. The marker lifts from the frozen ground with a sound like exhaling. Keenan squeezes my hand tighter. They load it onto the flatbed truck. Court order says it will be destroyed, recycled into gravel, or crushed to nothing. Evidence of fraud erased literally and legally. When the truck bed is secured, Keenan speaks. So no one's actually here, he asks. No one, I confirm. It was a lie. He stares at the empty plot for a long moment. Where does the stone go? He asks the nearest worker. I recycled or destroyed per court order, the man says gently. Keenan nods, turns to me, takes my hand with both of his now. Then we can go, he says. I don't need to see Dad here. He's not here. A 6-year-old leading his grandfather away from an empty grave. The rescue continues, but the roles keep reversing. Family court granted me primary custody with the Rawlings family, designated as permanent chosen family. Not foster care, not visitation rights. Chosen family legal status recognizing what Keenan drew before any adult understood the geography. The day after the cemetery, I bring him home. Not visiting, not temporarily. Home. I'd renovated while the custody hearing processed. Keenan's room, exactly as he left it, books, toys, everything preserved. But I made one change. I show him. Your room is exactly how you left it, I say. Plus, one change, this door connects to mine. Keenan looks at the new door between our bedrooms, painted the same cream as the wall's brass handle at his height. So you can hear if I need you, he asks. So we're both here, I tell him. Together. He tests the handle. It opens smoothly. Through it, my bedroom bed-made reading chair by the window photograph of Catherine and Timothy on the nightstand. I like it, he says simply. Ren and Bettina help us unpack the few things he accumulated at their house. Not much. Some clothes, the drawings, a stuffed bear Bettina bought him for his 6th birthday that he never celebrated. We're 10 minutes away, Ren tells Keenan. Anytime, any reason we come. I know, he says. Then more quietly, thank you for keeping me. Bettina's eyes fill. Sweetheart, thank you for letting us. After they leave the house, feels different. Not empty, not echoing. Occupied. Oh. Christmas morning, I wake to silence. For one terrible second, I think it was all a dream, investigation, rescue, custody, everything. Then I hear movement through the connecting door. I find Keenan in his room, standing by the window. He's placed the red boat on his bedside table. Next to it, a photograph of Timothy, holding him as an infant. It's morning, I say. I'll say morning, he replies. I turn 7 tomorrow. I remember, I tell him. We'll celebrate properly this time. Ren arrives at 9 with Bettina. They bring cinnamon rolls and gifts wrapped in newspaper comics, because Bettina believes expensive paper is wasteful. Keenan opens presents methodically. Books, art supplies, a model boat kit that will take weeks to build. Ren watches him arrange everything carefully on his shelf. Now, this room doesn't echo the way it did in October, she observes. Right, Keenan says. Someone's here now. A room stops echoing when someone lives in it. Simple architecture, profound truth. New Year's Eve, I find it by accident. Keenan's drawing from his first days at the Rawlings house tucked into a box Bettina packed. 3 buildings sketched in crayon labeled in a 6-year-old's careful printing. My house, the Valentine estate. Ren's house, the Kensington Row house. Grandpa's house, the Valentine estate again, but separate in his mind then. Lines connecting all 3, arrows, hearts. A map of family before any adult understood the geography. When did you draw this? I ask him. He looks up from the puzzle he's assembling. When I lived at Ren's, before you found me. You drew all 3 houses connected. And they are connected, he says matter of fact. You, me, Ren, Bettina, we're all family. Can we keep it? He thinks about this. It's yours now. You can keep it. I have it framed that afternoon. Archival glass, acid-free Matting Museum quality preservation. What's an empire worth if a 7-year-old doesn't believe you'll come for him? The drawing goes on my desk. 11:45 on New Year's Eve. Keenan is asleep upstairs in a room that no longer echoes. I sit alone in my office. On the desk, the 3-house drawing in its frame. The red boat Keenan returned to me, then took back, then placed on his bedside table as anchor. A photograph of the fountain pen I gave Ren. She sent me a picture of her acceptance letter to nursing school pen, visible in the corner of the frame. I open a leather journal. First time I've kept a diary in my life. Write the date, December 31st, 2025. Then, has spent 30 years building a company worth $200 million. Spent 1 year building truth worth a grandson's life. The most important thing I built this year had no foundation, no walls, no financial value. It was truth, and it held. A 10-year-old taught me some promises are more important than empires. A 6-year-old showed me belief matters more than evidence. A 17-year-old reminded me character reveals itself in what we ask for. My daughter is in prison. My grandson is upstairs sleeping. Both are consequences of choices. I chose to believe a child drawing boats in a stranger's house. Everything else followed. I set down the pen. Through the office window, snow begins falling on Chestnut Hill, the first of the new year. Upstairs, Keenan sleeps in a room that finally holds someone. 3 houses on the drawing, all connected by a child's certainty. The lie removed from the cemetery, the truth standing instead. Outside, the city prepares for midnight. Fireworks and champagne and resolutions people won't keep. Inside, a grandfather and grandson sleep under the same roof. No celebration needed. Some promises are their own reward. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the people closest to you can sometimes hide the darkest truths. I trusted my daughter without question for 30 years. When she told me Keenan had died, I never asked for proof. I never questioned the closed casket or the rushed funeral. Don't make my mistake. When something feels wrong, even with family, trust your instincts. I lost a year with my grandson because I chose comfort over truth. That's a year I'll never get back. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound because it comes from the place you're supposed to feel safest. But here's what I learned. Truth always surfaces no matter how deep someone buries it. Keenan's faith that I would find him, that 6-year-old belief, saved us both. And I believe God placed people like Ren and Bettina in our path when we needed them most. They had no reason to help us except that it was right. If you're facing family betrayal right now, know this: protecting the truth is always worth more than protecting the relationship. Always. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever experienced family betrayal? How did you find your way through it? Your story might help someone else listening right now. If this message resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories about truth, justice, and second chances. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Just a reminder, some details in this story have been fictionalized for dramatic and educational purposes. What matters is the lesson at its core.